Hello, everyone. This is Sarah Zakaria, Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the University of San Diego. I'm very excited to have you join us today for the webinar, Successful Transition from the Military. This webinar is co-hosted by the USD Navy ROTC, USD Veterans Center, and the USD Alumni Association. First, I would like to thank you for the time out of your busy schedule to join us this afternoon. Before we begin, please be mindful that today's webinar is being recorded. Access to the replay of this webinar will be found on the USD Alumni website and the University of San Diego YouTube channel about 2 weeks today. So if you need to step away from the webinar and are interested in viewing it at a later time, the archived broadcast will be posted soon. On your screen is a control panel with a chat area where you are able to ask questions. Questions are very welcomed, and Sherman Gillums is looking forward to hearing from you. So please submit your questions and we will answer as many as time allows. If you experience technical difficulties, please submit concerns via the chat area. In the event that we all experience technical difficulties during the webinar, we will attempt to resolve the issue as soon as possible. If we are unable to do so, we will reschedule the session and an email with the new date and time will be sent to you. Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenter. USD alumnus Sherman Gillums is the Deputy Executive Director at a veteran service organization, Paralyzed Veterans of America, which delivers transition assistance and advocacy for transitioning service members and veterans with disabilities. He is a Marine Corps veteran who served 12 years before suffering a non-catastrophic injury. He recovered and continued with his life, including finishing a master's degree in global leadership at USD School of Business. He currently resides in Washington, D.C. metro area and represents veterans on Capitol Hill and in the media. Welcome, Sherman. We now turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And before I begin, I want to thank each and every one of you who have served for giving your time and energy to not only to defend this country, but to move it forward and serve as examples for our society by continuing your education at the University of San Diego. As Sarah said, I underwent my own experience as a transitioning service member and eventually a veteran. So I know how tough it can be to go from the military culture back into society after giving much of your time in harm's way. But what I hope to do here today is to talk about transition in a way that gives you, that brings you less anxiety. You'll notice that on the screen, you'll see a blueprint. And anytime we endeavor to do something major, such as going to battle or something as less, something like building a home, we always have to have a plan. And in this case, I want you to look at your transition from the military in terms of a blueprint, because there are some ways that while there are uncertainties, there are things that we are certain about. And 3 things that we're certain about is veterans benefits, your health care, and what you're going to do after your career. All right. Now, this isn't TAP. This isn't your transition assistance program training. We can touch on any point that you want to hit on, but we will start with these 3 major concepts here. And when you send in your questions, if I can't answer them during this presentation, I'll connect with you offline and do my best to answer. So let's start with veterans benefit. First of all, when we think of a veteran, well, let me back up by talking about benefits in general. Every veteran is going to be entitled to some benefit in the VA. I come across men and women who have finished a tour of service, and they have no idea that if they serve, they got an honorable discharge, that there are veterans they can apply for, and these generally include the loan guarantee for your home or education benefits. Now, there are other benefits such as health care, compensation for an injury, life insurance, vocational rehabilitation. Those veterans are specific to certain circumstances, but If you are a veteran, this is an individual who has received an honorable discharge, you can apply for some benefit, and you should be aware of that. And in some cases, you can apply prior to getting out of the military. Let me start by talking about disability, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I run into with veterans and service members is, I don't have a disability, therefore I'm not going to apply for benefits. Now, there are some things that are obvious disabilities. If you've got a spinal cord injury, if you've got an amputation, blindness, things that happen, periodic things that can happen in combat, you'll be considered disabled for benefits purposes. But for the purpose of attaining benefits, it has nothing to do with how you got injured as much as it had to do with the fact that you went into the military, presumably in sound condition. This means you were 100% employable. All right. Now, none of us are perfect when we join, but if you're accepted for service in the military, you are healthy enough to do anything you are asked to do. You're considered 100% sound. And what happens is, by the time you finish 4 years, 8 years, or a full 20 years even, you're going to have some things that make you less perfect, whether it's migraine headaches. Most of us are going to have bad knees or a bad back at some point. And in those instances, you're considered disabled. That doesn't mean you can apply for Social Security or other workers' comp and all those types of things. But for the purpose of pursuing VA benefits, you're considered disabled. And you need to think about way when you're getting out of the military and you're taking your final physical, what ways you're less perfect than when you went into the military. And it could be as something as as innocuous as severe shaving bumps, because you had to shave for the 15 years you were in, and now your skin is hard and things like that. So I've seen a number of ways where a disability is rateable under the VA system. Pursue benefits in those cases. Now, pursue benefits before you get out, they can happen a number of ways. If you are injured or disabled to a point where the question of whether you're fit for duty, if you were in long enough, you probably remember the PEB boards or the med boards, where you're evaluated by the local medical facility. Those results are sent up to Washington, D.C., and there's a board that assesses whether you can continue service. That has morphed into what's called the Integrated Disability Evaluation System. The reason why it's morphed is because now the DoD and the VA collaborate to come up with a finding, and that makes it a lot easier for you to file your claim while you're still on active duty and being evaluated for duty. Short of that, let's say you've got some disabling conditions, but you're not at a point where you're unfit for duty and you are getting out, you can apply for benefits prior to your discharge, depending on how many days you have to go before that discharge date. Within 6 months, if you're 180 days out, and within 60 days, it's called benefits delivery at discharge. If you fall within a 60-day time frame to get out, it's called quick start. And what that entails is you'll get a physical within that period. All that work that would go to VA after you get discharged, it'll now go before you get discharged. And so ideally, by the time you hit your discharge date, you're going to have a VA rating. And this means you don't have to wait months, or in some cases years, for your VA disability compensation to begin. And this can be particularly helpful if you've got a family or other circumstances where you need that those immediate resources as you go through your transition. All right, moving on. The VA at this point, because the backlog and a lot of the other issues with the VA claim system have created a need for more streamlined processes, the VA has come up with a few things that have indeed made that process much more efficient. And you'll see there where we talk about e-benefits and the fully developed claim concept. For those of you who don't have an e-benefits account, the VA is going to encourage you to set that up, and you can do that in a number of ways. And we're going to see a short video that goes into how you do that. But the reason why you want to do that sooner rather than later is because once you set up that account, you can track the progress of your claim through the system. and that's great for alleviating a lot of concern, especially if you're waiting on a claim for a severe disability or a condition that precludes you from working. You may need those resources sooner rather than later. You've got bills to pay, you've got mortgage, you've got car payments, things like that. And if you know how long it's going to take to get those resources, that might make it easier for you to endure the wait. So let's see here. Let's see if this video is going to play for us.
Welcome to VA and DoD's eBenefits web portal. The following video will walk you through the step-by-step process for obtaining a DoD self-service logon, also known as a DS logon, which allows you to get free premium eBenefits access. A DS logon is a secure identity, username, and password that is used by various DoD and VA websites, including eBenefits. If you are already registered in the Defense Enrollment Eligibility Reporting System, known as DEERS, you are eligible for a DS logon. Once you have a DS logon, it is your permanent logon ID in providing identity authentication. How can you obtain a DS logon? By registering for an eBenefits account. When registering for an account, you will be asked a series of questions to assist you in obtaining a DS logon Level 2 eBenefits premium account and to verify your identity. With a premium account, you can view personal data about yourself in VA NOD system, apply for benefits online, check the status claims, update your address records, and more.
Sherman, can you up the volume? I'm getting several requests that they can't hear the video. Or we'll send out the link after after the presentation.
Yeah, when we tried this out, I had no control over the volume on my end. My laptop is as loud as I can get it. And as Sarah said, what we're going to do is send this link to Sarah to distribute via email. I think it's critical that you have the information, and I apologize for the lack of volume, but there was no way I could enhance the sound. But I'll make sure you get that, Sarah, so that all those who attended can have access to it. The video is about 6 minutes long, and I was only going to show about a minute, just to get everyone familiar with the e-benefits concept.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and just to elaborate a little bit on what the video talked about, the reason why you want to have this is it makes life much easier for things like when you need your certificate of eligibility for your post 9/11 GI Bill. You know, you may switch schools, and each school is going to require that letter. So you'll be able to download that right from the eBenefits website. If you have a child, if you and your spouse have a child and you need to add that child to your disability award, it'll be much easier to do that in eBenefits than to have to mail it into VA. So it gives you an interface with VA that obviates the need to call and do the 1-800 number thing. That's not always the best way to get a hold of someone. So we'll encourage you to do that as soon as possible, particularly if you're not going to be retired from the military. If you're not going to have any connection to DEERS, that means that either you retired from the military through medical or tenure. It's going to be much harder because you're not going to have that CAC card that you have right now. And there are other ways to get around that, but it's much more complicated. So it's just much easier to do it while you're in uniform. So let's look at that third bullet there, where it talks about accredited representation. Many of you may have heard about
Sherman? Hello, everyone. We lost Sherman. If you could hold on one moment, we'll try to reconnect. Sherman, can you hear me?
the idea. Can you hear me now, Sarah?
Yeah, we've lost your screen as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now. Let me figure out what's going on here. Sorry about that. Oh, how's that?
We're not seeing it yet.
You're not seeing it yet? All right, let's try this. Yeah, I don't know what just happened. I was trucking along.
Everyone, thank you for your patience as we figure out these technical difficulties.
We're doing share my screen again. All right, so let me know what you see.
Great, we're seeing it.
We're back? Okay. Adapt and overcome.
Yep.
All right, so we were talking about accredited representatives. Title 38 is a law that that gives VA its guide how it implements its programs, and under that law, under Title 38, certain organizations can be appointed to represent veterans. And the reason why you want to be familiar with that is because these people are often the lifeline between you getting a benefit at the maximum level possible and you maybe going it alone, believing that's, you know, you're not going to need as much help, and then finding out maybe years later that there were benefits that you missed out on. So it's important to understand the role that these organizations play in your pursuit of benefits. And just with a couple of them, I work for one called Paralyzed Veterans of America. We primarily advocate for veterans with spinal cord dysfunction, but we'll assist any veteran who comes to us for help and desires our representation. Others, and these are generally the big six you'll hear about. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, these are veterans who served in a wartime campaign. Disabled American veterans are for those who have a service-connected disability of any sort. The Military Order of the Purple Heart, obviously if you earn a Purple Heart, you'd be eligible for membership in that organization. American Legion is an organization that represents the veterans who served during a wartime era. So you don't have to have served in country, but if you served during a wartime era, you'd be eligible for membership. And the Vietnam Veterans of America are for those veterans who served in the Vietnam. And when I say veterans, I'm also talking about survivors and dependents. So if you know of someone who's the child of a Vietnam veteran, then that individual is likely to enjoy representation as well. And as I said before, these services are provided free of charge. So if you're approached by an attorney to file a claim or file an appeal, you're giving up what's essentially a free service that these organizations provide. They also will provide news on changes in benefits, updates in legislation, and they also function as a veteran's voice on Capitol Hill. So throwing your support behind these venerable organizations is a pretty good idea. So let's now turn to healthcare. This is the second pillar in what we called our transition blueprint. We all heard a lot about what happened in Phoenix and a lot of the allegations about waiting lists and things like that. I would encourage every service member who is anticipating having to use VA not to let those types of things scare you off. Those are more the exception rather than the typical experience of someone who turns to VA for healthcare. The VA is the largest healthcare system in the world, so there are likely to be aspects of it that are not as great as other parts of it. But the one good thing about the VA is that it is veteran-centric, and that's important because while it might not seem obvious to a healthcare provider, there are other things within the VA health realm that have to take into account aspects of veteran culture. For example, if you go in for certain types of disabilities and you also suffer traumatic stress, that might be something that's as obvious to a private sector provider as it would be to a VA doctor who can incorporate treatment or incorporate interventions in that address the acute disability as well as more ancillary concerns like post-traumatic stress. So let's talk about who can access care. To qualify for VA healthcare, you must have served at least 24 continuous months of active service, or if you were in the Guard or Reserve, the full period for which you were called to active duty. Now, active duty does not mean you were sent to by the governor to a state of a state where there was an emergency, for example. You have to have been activated for federal service, and you have to have served that entire time under the federal mandate to be qualified for VA healthcare. And this is really critical because there are an unprecedented number of Guard and Reserve who have served on active duty for extended periods that would now qualify for care, where in the past that wasn't the case. So if you were a guardsman or a reservist, you do qualify for health care if you served the full time for which you were called. That doesn't mean it has to be 24 months. The full time for which your order said you were active. Now, in some cases, you're going to have reservists who look at their active duty for time for the purpose of accessing care that will not qualify those individuals for care. So if all you have is active duty for training, all those drill periods, you won't qualify for care. Now, it talks about enhanced eligibility, that last slide. Enhanced eligibility means that while you qualify for basic care in the VA based on your service, there are instances where you will receive priority. For example, if you've got a service-connected disability, 50% or more, you're in that top priority. That means all the funding and all the scheduling and all those things, they're going to look to take care of those in that #1 category first. There are other instances that have nothing to do with your disability, however, where you can be placed in a priority group that's higher than 8, which is essentially the lowest group. If you've earned a Purple Heart, a Medal of Honor, if you were a POW, then you're going to enjoy priority care. If you're catastrophically disabled, whether it's service-connected or not, or if it's service-connected, you'll be in a #1 group. But if you're non-service connected and you become catastrophically disabled, our government has realized that these veterans can't pay for the level of care that they need, and so they've allowed those veterans to also access care, and they'll waive co-pays for that care because it'll present a financial hardship for the individuals. If you're below income and you're disabled, you also qualify for care in priority group 5. So depending on your circumstance, you'll want to make sure that you fall in these higher categories before being assigned to a group like 7 or 8, where you'll essentially pay co-pays because you're relatively healthy and your income doesn't put you low hardship level. I get questions about this all the time because VA will misassign people based on a lack of information, a lack of update, things like that. So we want to make sure veterans stay up on this as much as possible. And again, I want to emphasize, you don't have to be service connected to access this care. Now, I just want to make a quick mention about the Veterans Access Choice and Accountability Act of 2014. This will only apply to those of you who are already veterans. That means you're not active duty right now, and you were enrolled in the VA healthcare system on August 1st, 2014. This new law was passed as a result of, in part at least, the Phoenix scandal, where veterans were on waiting lists, and in other places they found a lot of veterans on waiting lists. And this law was set up to allow those veterans who were awaiting care to essentially go out into the private sector and access care at VA expense. And it only applies to veterans who can't get an appointment within 30 days, are 40 miles or more from the nearest VA, or have a physical barrier that impedes accessing a VA medical center. And that will be a physical barrier, whether it's, some places have bridges that you have to cross, and those bridges aren't always open for whatever reason, or if there's a bad storm, those can also preclude access. So this law allows those veterans to access care with what's called a Veterans Choice Card. So if you got one of those in the mail, that's why you received it. And again, I get a lot of questions about this one because a lot of veterans haven't been well informed about what this act was intended to do. And this chart here just shows you all the types of care that you can receive as an enrolled veteran. It's pretty comprehensive. I've used it for the last 12 years. If you need immunization, this doesn't mean you won't go to other providers. If you've got a job where you can um, get care from another provider, you don't want to wait, that's fine. But it doesn't cost you anything to access VA care. If it does cost you, it'll be very little. It's comparable compared to other types of policies you might have. And I just want to touch on a few of the advantages of enrolling in the VA healthcare system. One of them is it satisfies the requirements under the Affordable Care Act to maintain health coverage. So enrolling in VA and this will prevent you from having the penalty levied for not having care. Here's a pretty one. It covers non-emergency medical expenses. So if you enroll in the VA healthcare system and you walked out and God forbid you get hit by a car, the ambulance is going to take you to the nearest facility and they're going to begin working on you. All those expenses you would otherwise incur if you didn't have coverage will be borne by VA. Now, you have to leave that non-VA facility once you're stabilized, or you have to transfer to a VA once you're stabilized. But the ambulance ride, all the emergency services, all the things that they do just to save your life or to patch you up and get you stable, those will be covered by VA because you're an enrolled veteran. We see a lot of this with older veterans who have a heart attack. They don't have to actually have a heart attack. They simply have to believe that their life was in danger, and that's why they dial 911. And even though the hospital is going to send the veteran because they have to bill someone, you can take that bill to the VA business office, and the VA will be responsible for covering that care, provided that the veteran, once stabilized, left that non-VA facility. If you have VA appointments, the VA will reimburse you for your mileage to those appointments. And there are a number of long-term care options and non-VA options. If the VA can't provide care, they can find a way to have that care paid for by VA, even though it's provided by an outside physician. And this is critical, particularly where women's care is concerned, because the VA doesn't provide obstetrics and care related to childbirth. They will often send you out into the community to have those services provided by a community provider. But VA will cover those types of services. And where it talks about Title 38 protections, if you go out to a provider and let's say the wrong thing happens, they misdiagnose you and things like that, there are steps you can take within the VA system that offer you protections that you would otherwise not enjoy outside the VA. Okay, so there are aspects of VA care that have clear upsides over private care. So let's talk about the one you probably hear more about than anything else, and that's your post-service career. It's just that I wouldn't say benefits and healthcare are not as important, but this is the one that's been toughest to address because we're talking about things that are bigger than anything the VA can provide, and it depends on a lot of factors, and one of them is the economy. One of them is how prepared you are to take on the challenge of finding a good career. Personally, I served in the Marine Corps for 12 years. I joined at 17. I had never sat through a job interview. I had never written a resume. It was the only job I ever knew. And so getting out, it was pretty hard to throw myself into the mix as a person who was ready to I was ready to work, but ready to be a job seeker. I don't think I was as prepared as I needed to be. And one of the biggest aspects of this part of your transition is going to be what gets lost in translation. And what we're talking about are the skills that you acquire as a military person that don't easily translate when you're talking to an employer. I'm not saying it doesn't translate in terms of the how you apply those skills, but you have to sell yourself as a person who can apply these skills to an employer before you can get hired and prove that they can in fact apply in the civilian sector. And so finding a seamless path where your career transition is concerned is going to be pretty difficult. And I just want to put an infographic up here that paints the picture for you. It talks about how 72% of those who will hire you have a hard time looking at your resume, looking at your experience, and determining whether you're a fit for their company. And that second statistic, where it talks about 79% of those veterans who are unemployed, they also have a hard time taking those military skills. And we're not talking about, somebody who served in infantry. We're talking about people in IT fields. Believe it or not, a corpsman who's having a hard time translating those skills into the health sector, because when you're in the military, you don't have the certifications you need. You have to get certified and meet certain state requirements, even though you probably have performed levels comparable to a surgeon in some cases, depending on your experience. So this is why this is a difficult issue. This is why we spend a lot of time in our organization trying to understand how to help veterans transition through these barriers with a lot more efficiency. And I just want you to be aware of them, because they will become things that, as you finish up your studies at USD, you may find yourself up against things. The best way to open doors, though, is to know which services to access, whether they're in VA, Department of Labor. You've got some nonprofits. Paralyzed Veterans of America has a SAVE program where we customize the advocacy and help veterans design a specific path that meets the needs of the individual. And so what I want to do is,
If I could add a 2 cents in there, Sherman. Also, all USD alumni, career services is a lifetime benefit. You can always call career services and meet with a career counselor, come to the workshops, and that's for the lifetime. Your lifetime. If you're going through career change even after your separation from the military. So I wanted to just plug that. Thanks, Sherman.
That's great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this presentation to Sarah to distribute, because there are some links in here that you may want to ask. I hear a lot of veterans talking about accessing lists that show federal jobs. USAjobs.gov is a pretty good one. Now, these things do become resume mills, and you will get lost in the shuffle if you upload a resume, fill out the application, and simply leave it at that. The reason why a lot of you may want to consider applying for disability compensation is because in certain circumstances it gives you veterans preference and even a non-competitive process that will link you up to federal employment if you're rated high enough. So even though you might feel like I'm not as disabled, or I'm not, I don't want to, I just don't want to get involved in filing for disability and things like that. There are advantages in federal hiring that you enjoy, you and your dependents. In fact, if you're the spouse of a veteran who's 100% and you still want to work, you'll have preference for certain jobs, even non-competitively. So there's an incentive there to apply for disability compensation. The Veterans Employment Center is a new initiative released by the VA that takes all those resources and puts them in one portal. They finally did this after we clamored for it for years. We complained about all these resources that are thrown at veterans, and they have to go to all these places to find information. Well, this Veterans Employment Center consolidates a lot of that into one place where you can go and look for resume assistance, career tips. I think there's a resume builder that was added. So you've got a lot of resources in one place where you can help with your career search. There's also education like the post 9/11 GI Bill. And again, if you get a disability rating high enough or relevant to why you're having problems finding a job, you can be given vocational rehabilitation benefits, which provide you with additional tools that'll help you design a career path going forward and help you overcome barriers to your vocational pursuits. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, at the bottom there, we talk about security clearance tips. And I added that to the slide because while a lot of you who are already out of the military may not be able to benefit from this, I think a lot of service members who are anticipating their discharge from the military don't know enough about the advantages that having a security clearance offer you before you get out, if you can take advantage of them. And so I'll put this chart up here. For example, in California, where you're all located, where I once lived, here's a chart that shows the average salary of a government contractor who wants to work for a firm like Lockheed or Raytheon if you maintain certain levels of clearance. With no clearance, you can command a salary of about $72,000, which in San Diego, may or may not be enough to live on, depending on the size of your family, where you live, things like that. But with a secret clearance and then a enhanced clearance, this is where you can expect to market yourself by maintaining those clearances. Which begs the question, how do I keep my clearance active? And here's a few things that you may or may not know. Your clearance is considered active if you are within 2 years of having used it, and for the most part, if you've got the clearance, you probably used it, and you're within 5 years of your last investigation, and this is for a top secret clearance, and 10 years of your last investigation for a secret clearance. And so you'd probably have to consult with your, whichever office, your security office at your respective commands would know this, but you check your records, and if you meet those two criteria, then here's what you'll want to do. You want to direct a request to your command security officer asking that you be allowed to voluntarily be reinvestigated within 1 year of your security clearance expiration. And the reason you used to justify that is to keep your options open in case you want to do reserve duty or the IRR, if that's your intent. Now, sometimes you know for a fact that you're getting out, you're not going to have anything else to do with the military, you're disabled, maybe you're unfit for duty, this wouldn't be an option for you. But if you're relatively healthy and you want to keep your options open, or at least have this as an option available, this would be the justification for continuing your security clearance. All right, and you would submit that with the endorsement of your command, your commanding officer, or whoever happens to be have oversight over these matters. And you would submit that letter, and there's a possibility that you'd be allowed to extend your clearance. And what happens is when you sit down for an interview with a Raytheon or with a contractor, and they see that you've got this clearance, and they won't have to pay for it, it's something that can be pretty expensive for a lot of these companies, then you're probably going to walk right into a job and command salary along the lines of what I showed you in that bar graph. So I just wanted to add that to this presentation because there are a few of you who may still be active duty and may have this as a possible means of paving a clear path towards employment right after you get out. With that being said, I will entertain any questions. And you can ask a question that has to do with what we've covered or something that I might not have covered, but I may be able to help you with anyway. And Sarah, I guess I'll wait to hear from you.
Hi, sorry, I was on pause. I am interested in veterans healthcare. This is from one of our attendees. I've heard that it only lasts 5 years after you leave the military, but I've also heard that it lasts a lifetime. Can you please clarify?
Sure. Any veteran of the post 9/11 era who has served in theater is going to be, I believe it's under priority group 6, you're going to be given 5 years of healthcare coverage. If you do nothing else, then that's where it'll stand. If you do nothing else, if you never meet the eligibility under another priority group. So ideally, this is what will happen. You get your 5 years of coverage. During that time, you're going to apply for disability compensation and then be assigned to the appropriate priority group. So let's say you got out, you applied for healthcare under this 5-year window, and then you filed for a claim and you were given a 50% disability rating. From that point going forward, priority group 1, so it would supersede that initial assignment to priority group 6 under the 5-year coverage provision. So what that does, it gives you 5 years to essentially reestablish your eligibility under a different priority group. Now, let's say you're healthy, you'd never apply for benefits, you got a job, you've got coverage under some other plan. Then it'll expire after 5 years and you're done with it. But you can always come back and apply to VA even after that. So if you, for example, and I've seen this happen, you go away from the VA for 10 years, you get hit by a car, you become paralyzed, or you get stricken with multiple sclerosis, or you get some other affliction, you can go back and apply for care. You now meet eligibility under a different criteria. One would be the catastrophic disability that I talked about under priority group 4. In the case of multiple sclerosis, if you're within 7 years of discharge from the military, you can be assigned service connection under a presumptive basis because they do associate MS and ALS with military service. So this is an example of why you want to talk to a veteran service organization, because there are a lot of provisions you may not know about. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, I'll be happy to elaborate.
Thank you, Sherman. I have our next question. Could you please explain the rating system for VA disability? For example, how can a member receive 0% yet still receive benefits?
Okay, now VA disability is rated on things. Number one, you have to have the diagnosis itself, but you also have to have the functional loss. So you can have a diagnosis but no functional loss and be given a 0%. Some benefits are based solely on the fact that you have a percent at all. So having a 0% is not the same as getting a denial, a complete denial. What VA is saying when they deny you benefits is that you either don't have a diagnosis or it's not related to service. In the case of a 0%, they're saying you have a diagnosis but you have no functional loss. So the benefits that accrue to a veteran just for having a rating would be a circumstance where you'd have a 0, but you would still enjoy entitlement to other benefits simply because you have a rating, period. Hopefully that wasn't too convoluted of an answer. It is crazy with the math and the ways that VA calculates disability, but that's the hopefully that's the answer you're looking for.
Yeah, thank you, Sherman. These are really great, detailed answers. I have another question. Is there something called Veterans Readjustment Appointment for Civil Service? And do you know anything about that?
Those are the types of things that are so obscure only because I don't see a lot of it. There are certain federal agencies that if you serve and if you become disabled, you're entitled to benefits as if you were in the 5 uniformed services. Won't be the public health service, and I'm only going to assume that it would apply to those types of professions, or it may even apply to civil service. If you're a GS worker who works for the DoD, I'd have to look deeper into that. In fact, because I don't know enough about that, I'm not going to try to answer beyond that. But what I will do is educate myself on it and talk to a few people and give whoever that individual is a good answer on that.
Great, thank you very much. And I also want to thank all of our participants for taking the time to be at this webinar, and thank you for your questions and participation. I'd also like to extend a special vote of gratitude to our alumni presenter, Sherman Gillums. Thank you so much. This was so informative. In addition, I'd like to thank the Young Alumni Network Programming Committee, USD Alumni Board Outreach Committee, and the Mid-Career Alumni Network who worked together to create the webinar program. There are many ways to stay involved with University of San Diego. Come back to campus and tour the new USD Veteran Center. It just opened in October of last year. Connect with us via social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Flickr, and YouTube. This webinar will be posted on the U of San Diego YouTube channel. Also, coming up in San Diego, you can attend the Combat Leadership Panel on Wednesday, March 4th. It's at 1800 hours at San Diego State Alumni Center. There's space available for up to 400 people, and email Captain JJ Labouliere at jlaboulliere@mail.sdsu.edu for your reservation. I'll also send that out via email. And lastly, support student veterans by designating your gift to USD or NROTC or the Veteran Center at giveonthego.sandiego.edu. No matter where you are a Trail for life. And I also want to add my my thank you to all of the service members for your service to America and to the world, and for all that you do. We are so grateful. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.